I think that was one of the big outcomes we thought COP could produce, actually. I mean, with sort of three things in mind, how do you accelerate momentum and commitment and align these major economies? How can you sort of articulate meaningfully these significant shifts in how we'll sort of utilize energy and the infrastructure that supports it? And then third one was cementing these collaborations globally.
Hello and welcome to Energy Unplugged by Aurora. This podcast features various experts from Aurora having in-depth conversations with key industry leaders, policymakers and academics from all over the world. It explores the hottest topics across the energy market and gives a unique perspective on major energy issues.
Welcome to Energy Unplugged. I'm Dan Monzani, Managing Director for UK and Ireland at Aurora. My guest today began her career trading power and gas for Centrica, and then between 2014 and 2017, when she and I first got to know each other, she was the director for the UK system operator, responsible for keeping the lights on day in and day out, as well as helping design the legal separation of the system operator from the rest of National Grid, which owns transmission networks. Before returning to the UK earlier this year, she was Chief Operating Officer for National Grid's US gas business, and she's now President of National Grid Ventures, the competitive arm of National Grid, which invests in, owns and operates electrical interconnection, LNG terminals, carbon capture projects, and a variety of other assets that help to integrate the system. My guest today is Cordi O'Hara. Welcome to Energy Unplugged, Cordi.
It's great to be here, Dan, and I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you.
Excellent. Let's start with National Grid Ventures then. I'd like to understand how your business fits within the wider National Grid group. I suspect many of our listeners will be very familiar with National Grid, which invests in the UK and the US, but largely makes its returns through regulated network assets. Whereas National Grid Ventures, I think, is something quite different, isn't it? It's much more about competitive merchant markets. So what is it that defines which parts of the energy transition you choose to invest in as National Grid Ventures?
Yeah, great question. And as you sort of laid out in the introduction, we are a separate division of National Grid, and we are focused on investing in clean energy transition assets, and with the aim to really help facilitate the delivery of net zero. And that acknowledges quite rightly that whilst networks have a very large role to play in that, there are also other technologies and areas of expertise that will need to be delivered. And so we look at it quite simply in terms of the opportunities that are adjacent to our key markets that we operate in, or where we have a customer base, where we can bring to bear our understanding of market development, business model development, and where we can also bring to bear our engineering competence. That said, we also recognise that we won't have all of the components necessarily, and so we're very much a partner model. So we like to create a compelling offering to deliver net zero in some of these more competed technologies by combining capabilities with key partners. And I think we're going to talk a bit more about electricity interconnectors today, but I think that is a fantastic example of, we believe interconnection will be needed to help deliver net zero. Those interconnectors connect into our home markets and into with our European neighbours. The subsea cabling brings to bear, our engineering competence, and the European TSOs we work with are phenomenal partners who we can share the work with to develop, the current point-to-point interconnectors and future designs as well.
Great. Yeah. Okay. That's really clear. And interesting, you raised the point about the engineering expertise that you obviously have within the group more widely. Does that sort of define where you choose to go as well? Sort of, capital intensive assets with a serious kind of mechanical engineering and electrical engineering aspect to it, or would you look at some of the sort of digital integration assets that are sort of really increasingly important across the system? Are there any sort of boundaries to where you might go, or is it really sort of any of those adjacent sort of energy transition assets that you think about investing in?
Yeah, I mean, we want to have a disciplined approach, and we are at our heart a long-term infrastructure business. We're an owner and an operator of those assets. And so a lot of our decision choices will be around the sort of very nature of the business, but then maybe in technologies that aren't regulated, but have the similar characteristics. We do know, though, that the clean energy transition will require a level of digitization on the ways in which we work, how our infrastructure interacts with broader energy systems, and how that sort of enables a more distributed energy system where, you know, consumers are playing a part in balancing those systems, and they're making choices as prosumers, producers and consumers, in this sort of green integrated world that we see ahead of us. So digital and having a digital mindset and approach is part of National Grid's approach as we look forward, whether that's in our core regulated or in some of these technologies. But just being a pure digital play, probably less likely, but it's absolutely complementary to the infrastructure and the way we see systems and networks operating in the future.
Brilliant. Let's dive into some of the things you talked about there. So in particular, we're going to talk today about the North Sea, and you've just completed a really major project to commission North Sea Link, which is the longest subsea interconnector in the world, I understand.
Yes.
Over 700 kilometres long?
720 kilometres, yes.
Oh, sorry. Don't want to miss out those last 20. They're probably the really critical ones. And that runs from Blyth in the northeast of England all the way to Norway's major hydropower resources. I mean, that must have been one hell of an engineering challenge. What were some of the problems your team had to tackle in building something over that kind of range and those kind of topologies?
Yeah, so, you know, I think just to start off, we're immensely proud of this interconnector, and it has been an absolutely phenomenal partnership with Statnett, the TSO in Norway, and it is much longer than anything we've ever built before, and it's in much deeper waters as well. And the project took 6 years to build, more than 4 million working hours, with almost 6,000 working days at sea. And just if you were to sort of have a visual of this and look it on a map, we had to navigate much more sort of difficult terrain in Norway. We had to actually tunnel through a mountain. We had to build a specialist sort of cable laying barge to take it across lakes and fjords. So we really had to be quite resourceful and really work together as a team to just navigate a very different terrain from what we've, you know, traditionally navigated. And really, it's all there. The skills and the capabilities were there. The partnership brought them to bear. And hence we're just so proud of what we've managed to achieve on this one.
Do you think interconnectors can just keep getting ever longer? I think you've got a project, Denmark Viking Link, which is even slightly longer than the Norwegian project you've just finished. But there must be. I mean, is there a natural limit to this? I mean, do the losses increase once you get above I don't know, what's the limit? 1,000 kilometers? How much longer could they keep guessing?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I couldn't give you a fully definitive answer, but what I could say is, you know, that there are longer links proposed. X-links to Morocco. There's one proposed to connect Singapore and Australia. I think what we do know is HVDC technology is getting better. So you could argue it is technically feasible. But I think we shouldn't sort of just focus on the sort of who can be the biggest or the longest, although that, you know, from an engineering challenge standpoint, that's fascinating. But our focus has been on developing projects that deliver the most benefits to consumers, you know, and our focus has been UK and Europe and that make sort of commercial sense. Where I see the sort of future of these links, there may be some longer, as we've discussed, but we're going to have to think about how they help facilitate the offshore wind agenda. And actually, maybe the technical challenge and opportunity is what we're calling hybrid projects or multi-purpose interconnectors, so that it's not just the sort of the length, but also the facility and what it does. But as a sort of macro view from National Grid more generally on grids, I think we're seeing that connecting regions across the globe is a very positive ambition and seeks to sort of share resources and resiliency. So I do think you'll see, longer links. I think you'll see sort of slightly different designs of links, and I think you'll see that onshore connecting even maybe larger regions as we all sort of seek to share and optimize the surpluses of renewable generation and manage the resiliency and the intermittency as well, which those new technologies bring to bear.
Norway's a great example of that, isn't it? Because of the complementarity between wind and hydropower.
Yes.
So an obvious link there. I suppose on some of the other ones, one of the challenges, which you'll be very familiar with as a former system operator, is interconnectors can flow in both directions, can't they? So
yes,
when margins are tight, the question gets raised, well, can you really rely on interconnectors for energy security? Or, when there's not enough power and push comes to shove, will politics intervene to stop electricity flowing into the country across some of those interconnectors?
I mean, what I'd say to that is we've seen phenomenal benefit from the current portfolio of interconnectors, and we've seen those interconnectors operate very efficiently to where the markets need the power. Where power scarcity exists, those interconnectors efficiently do flow into those higher priced markets to reflect that scarcity. And actually, as I look forward, and analysis has said we're by the time I've finished Viking, we'll be at 8 gigawatts. Actually, in the next time period, you'll need potentially up to 18 gigawatts of interconnection. And actually, I'd argue that in terms of system security, you need more interconnector capacity, not less. And I say that because we are going to be maximising the amazing resource base, which is the North Sea. Which is, really a green powerhouse, and so many offshore renewable megawatts will be deployed, and the interconnectors are, I think, going to be the perfect tool to both connect those assets efficiently, but then actually to manage the intermittency, because interconnectors can quickly react to changes in supply and demand. They can then therefore effectively share resources where they're most needed. And so, I think we've been seeing recently, they're a good tool to support security supply for us and our neighbours. And I'll just give you the example, sort of one of our links, Nemo. That's been critical in bolstering Belgian security supply when they had nuclear outages in 2019. And similarly, we've often exported to France during their winter as well. I mean, the politics are sort of what they are, but I'm actually optimistic because I think we've got a substantial portfolio now that we can understand the benefits, and we can see the interaction with the wind agenda as we look forward.
Yeah, it's a really important point, isn't it? I mean, I can remember looking at, Aurora's done a fair bit of work looking at interconnectors and their benefits, but actually looking at the granularity of the French tea time peak being, I think it's half an hour or an hour, depending on the time of year, before the UK peak, because of where the demand is and what latitude that's at, and watching interconnectors literally swing half hour to half hour to support one peak and then the other. I think so. That's a really fascinating case study, and that security supply you're just talking about.
Agreed.
Should we turn to the North Sea and the future of how you connect up both further interconnection, but also all that wind that we're going to need? The government's committed to 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, much of it's off East Anglia in the North Sea. And it's quite possible that that could double again around the country in the 20 years thereafterwards. So you've already alluded to it. I know you're thinking about how you can be involved in building out hybrid assets, offshore transmission grid.
Yes.
What are the technical barriers to doing that?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been having quite a bit of debate about this at COP, really, because I think technically it's largely feasible. And, actually the UK and Europe is a leader in this space. And we've built an enormous amount of expertise already working in the North Sea environment with suppliers and partners, so the full sort of value chain. So for me, I'm not convinced it's necessarily technical barriers, but the challenge of agreeing the frameworks that ensure the infrastructure we need gets built in the tight timescales. And it's a phenomenal shift in pace and tempo to meet the new targets. And then I think the other challenge is onshore. There'll be significant onshore infrastructure needed. And how are we going to find better ways to coordinate all of the infrastructure that's needed and bring the coastal communities with us? That I think is an absolutely essential point. Can we create a more coordinated way of delivering quickly that actually brings about the benefits of green electricity and reducing the impact on the coastal communities who are seeing a lot of landing points and infrastructure requirements right now?
Yeah, I think that's something MPs get in their post bags. It's something I think we hear from wind developers, actually, because it bubbles up into local planning decisions, and there's a risk that the system slows rather than enables that build out of wind. Ofgem and the government have started to look at this through the offshore transmission network review.
Yeah,
I guess there's a balance between what you can do longer term and what you can do shorter term. How much are you able to work bilaterally with developers to try and coordinate the build out of grids, or frankly, is that just too much to ask between market actors? And do you think that therefore there's a sort of systematic regulatory reform that's a prior requirement?
I mean, sort of reality. We're going to have all parties working together: government, regulators, transmission system operators, developers, communities. To be successful, we'll need to do things differently. So that does point to a level of systemic change. And actually, we've sort of been very welcoming of the BEIS offshore transmission network review that you mentioned, and I think it's helpful in taking things forward. We've got to recognise the importance of cross-border infrastructure. I know the OTNR is primarily focused on UK wind connection, but we will need routes to share that wind generation with other countries. We'll need to maintain a level of regulatory flexibility, to your point about early opportunities, and how can we create an environment where we design for the future, and what level of systemic change is needed there, but what can we practically do in this sort of what I call the sort of critical next decade? And I think there is a level of pathfinder deals that will help sort of pick up pace and maybe can be done without needing all of the sort of systemic change, and it will inform new markets and new regulatory arrangements. And I can see direction of travel and more central planning. But we need to create some momentum in the short term as well. So what can we do sort of bilaterally and push things forward using and tweaking existing frameworks if we're willing to accept some of these pathfinder projects? And then how can we use practical understanding and learning to inform the long-term regime and the systemic change needed? I'd like to see both, I think.
Yeah, and how much of that can be done as a UK initiative? I mean, I'm thinking some of the more ambitious things I've seen on North Sea grids have involved. I mean, we touched on hybrid interconnectors, so that's interconnector or transmission cabling that links up wind farms and then carries on to another market, so that you can either operate as an interconnector or as a transmission connection for the wind. I've even seen plans for an artificial island built with hydrogen electrolyzers on it.
Yes.
So let me just push you on the point about pathfinders versus central planning. Do you think you can capture the full benefits of that space incrementally with pathfinders? Or if you're really aiming at such a really grand plan with a fully integrated grid plus artificial islands building with electrolyzers on them, does that need to be fully centrally planned out? I mean, I'm just testing your point a bit about how much can pathfinders lead the way, or will we regret having done certain things if we do them before we have a central plan?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's the big conundrum, isn't it, that we're all trying to work through. I mean, how we're seeing it at National Grid is, this is going to likely happen in phases, and trying to sort of break the problem down a little bit. And I really think we've been actually in the phase one of building out a North Sea grid, which is, point-to-point interconnection. and we've proven we can do that successfully, and we've proven the sort of benefits of doing that. Now I'm seeing we're in the sort of phase 2, which is this concept of hybrid projects, and actually this first step in creating coordinated offshore infrastructure, and accelerating offshore wind, and maximizing the use of that available generation, and creating a deeper relationship with EU partners in the way that we arrange and understand their operation. And then I think the third phase is this concept of energy islands, which are artificial platforms, arguably developed in the North Sea, which, as you rightly say, can be both the technologies we have today, like offshore wind, and then hydrogen electrolyzers, and actually the energy island itself can manage the surplus by converting to hydrogen storing. So that would become arguably more efficient and resilient. And then you've got this final sort of meshed offshore grid with bidding zones. I worry that if you think about phase 1, 2, and 3, if we try to get to 3, is it going to take us 3 years or more to sort of work it all out? And there may be least regret in doing some pathfinders, but I think we'll learn more than we'll regret. And I do believe that you've got to sort of break the challenge down. And actually, the more that we do the pathfinders, the more collaboration and working together, I think will accelerate the third phase. That is my fundamental belief.
Yeah, and you talked there about international cooperation with you've got a lot of experience working with your counterparts in other countries, often through JVs, and obviously through other countries. You've also been in Glasgow, I think, for COP over the last couple of weeks, helping to lead on the Green Grid Initiative.
Yes.
What are the opportunities for wider global cooperation on grids then?
Oh, I mean, I think that was one of the big outcomes we thought COP could produce, actually. I mean, we've sort of 3 things in mind. How do you accelerate momentum and commitment and align these major economies? How can you sort of articulate meaningfully these significant shifts in how we'll sort of utilize energy and the infrastructure that supports it? And then third one was cementing these collaborations globally. And so, just a moment on the Green Grids Initiative then. So that's the UK and Indian governments announcing this Green Grid Initiative that National Grid are actually supporting. And it's looking how you can accelerate solar deployment more widely, but then delivering a more connected grid to those resources so that clean energy can be shared across multiple regions. And I think that's just a perfect example of, there's many countries trying to solve the same problem. And actually these sort of efforts can help the knowledge sharing, and actually can probably help emerging economies accelerate the transition. So I think there's a very meaningful intent from COP that has been global collaboration, learning from each other, and acknowledging certain economies are in different phases of the evolution. And if we can help accelerate those who are a little bit further behind, and also learn something to keep us moving forward, that's just got to be a great thing.
I want to turn back to the North Sea now, having sort of explored grids globally. You're involved in the consortium in the Humber for CCUS, which is now being approved as one of the early sites, one of the early clusters.
That's right.
When does that go operational? Are you expecting that in the next? It's quite soon, isn't it?
So the East Coast cluster, which is in Humber and Teesside, and was selected as one of the first 2 industrial clusters by the government most recently. And yes, it's looking to deploy carbon capture, use and storage, which is the transport and storage infrastructure, by the mid-2020s. So
sounds like a very ambitious timetable.
Ambitious. We've got some great partners that we're working with, and we're sort of just working through the process at the moment.
Yeah, and you've delivered some amazing engineering successes in all sorts of parts of the value chain. But I mean, I asked you the kind of skeptical question that people have about interconnectors. I suppose the skeptical question people have about CCUS is how, it hasn't been done widely worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
How confident can we be that those stores will keep the carbon dioxide secure in perpetuity?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important question. We've got to assure ourselves of as we move into these new infrastructure needs and requirements. So our partners in the project are BP and Equinor, Total, and Shell. And so when we've looked at coming together for this East Coast cluster, the storage sites, have to be very carefully chosen, and licensing is dependent on a comprehensive assessment, really, of leakage risk. And there would be, for the storage site selected, rigorous and ongoing monitoring, verification procedures in place to monitor and understand the behaviour of the CO2. So CO2 sites, I don't know, I'm sure your listeners know, but they are sort of depleted oil and gas fields. They are well understood, and they have been used to store gas and therefore CO2 naturally. So, we've got to take these questions of safety and storage very, very seriously. That's why the expertise that's going to be brought to bear through our consortium is really important. And, in that context, we've seen successful CO2 storage operations carried out in Norway for more than 20 years, and they're permanently storing 1 million tonnes of CO2 every year deep under the Norwegian North Sea. So for me, it's a really important question to answer. You will have to have the right expertise and protocols in place, and that's why the partners and the credibility they bring to our cluster is really important.
I think you're developing some hydrogen projects alongside that, perhaps also elsewhere in the world. I think blue hydrogen initially. Where do you see as the most attractive business environment for investing in hydrogen at the moment?
Yeah, so we think hydrogen's going to play a really important role at blue and green. Blue's an important bridge and ensures that we've got a level of secure and affordable energy in the UK and the US. In the northeast of the US, we think hydrogen's got the potential to decarbonise multiple sectors, actually: industry, power generation, transportation and heating. And we're also seeing hydrogen as a really important form of storage in the future, because actually it can be stored for days, weeks, or even months, and can play a critical role in providing long duration and seasonal storage, which means we'll maintain reliability and resiliency throughout the year. And that's going to be really important for New York State, for example, where we operate, because it's going to continue to add more and more renewables to its grid. And it will require a form of management of intermittency and optimization of the surpluses that will come with that. So yeah, we are positive about the role of hydrogen. Where we have a substantial footprint in the US, we're really exploring the sectors it will be used for, and also defining better the role it will play for storage purposes.
It's really interesting to hear you describe the features that might make hydrogen valuable in the northeast of the US. It certainly resonates with some of the work we've done in Aurora around our new hydrogen product and the market attractiveness index that we regularly update. I mean, focused in Europe, looking at the main markets there, but it is those features of the industries that might be customers for hydrogen, as well as the right regulatory incentives and regimes that make those markets, I mean, particularly Germany, Netherlands, UK, attractive for early movers. But I wanted to dig in a bit more, actually, in the couple of minutes we've got left, to your experiences in the US, because obviously you were out there for 3 years as COO of the National Grid gas business out there, and I think the UK often keeps quite a close eye on US politics. It's been really interesting watching how the bipartisan infrastructure bill has made its way through Congress and has now been passed. But there are still challenges with other parts of climate legislation over there. I mean, is this one where we should be depressed, glass half empty, that climate is still a very divisive issue, at least federally? Or are you optimistic that major legislation like that infrastructure bill is going to allow the US to make sustained investments in climate change measures?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna go positive on this one, actually, Dan, because I just thought, the Biden administration has set some overarching goals now that I think are very significant as we look forward, and they've mobilised a whole of government effort really to reduce climate pollution in every sector of the economy and increase resilience to climate impacts as part of that. And there's a huge focus on job creation, especially union jobs, and improving infrastructure and actually delivering an equitable clean energy future as we progress towards net zero. So, there's been very specific commitments from the administration on offshore wind, on solar, and now that's playing throughout in the legislation. And the latest legislation that was passed includes $73 billion for power infrastructure, and that's actually the single largest investment in clean energy transmission in American history. So, and that includes the Bipartisan Energy Infrastructure Act, which is funding for critical minerals, critical energy technologies like carbon capture, hydrogen, and energy efficiency. So, there's always more to be done, isn't there? But actually, in terms of the momentum that's being created through the goals the administration has set, and then now seeing some of the funding come to bear, that's what we can work with that. And progress over perfection. There's a lot more to go, but I'm going to choose to be optimistic.
Yeah, and when you're measuring progress in tens of billions, I guess that's got to be the right answer, hasn't it? I mean, do you think we also on this side of the Atlantic sometimes overstate the importance of federal versus state action in the US?
I mean, what I saw was, we have a very engaged, state system, and the governors of each state can be incredibly progressive and set their own goals. Like New York CLCPA, which has really laid out very specific goals and targets for New York State, including incenting specific technologies to be delivered by certain time periods, because they know offshore wind's coming, therefore they need a certain amount of energy storage, battery storage. And so, my experience has been that it's really helpful to have this federal umbrella and additional sort of funding and commitment and increasing innovation at that level. But we have in the states that we serve, we have seen a tremendous leadership on the clean energy transition from state governors, and that has then fed into regulatory frameworks and updated those frameworks to incentivize clean energy infrastructure to be built. So I think it takes both, and actually some of the state positions are very progressive and should be celebrated.
That's brilliant, and always good to end on an upbeat note. Cordi, thank you. It's been a fascinating discussion. We covered the North Sea, worldwide grids, American politics. Really, really helpful insights on the global energy transition. So thank you very much for joining us today.
It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Dan, and I'm sure I will see you soon.
That was Dan Monzani, Managing Director of UK and Ireland at Aurora, talking to Cordi O'Hara, President of National Grid Ventures. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to subscribe on whatever platform you use. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.